Hi, I'm Ilana Rubel. I am the Assistant Minority Leader here in the Idaho House of Representatives. I represent District 18, which is Southeast Boise. And I have been in here since the beginning of 2014 when I was appointed to fill an open seat in District 18. One of our legislators moved to Seattle halfway through his term, and that left an open seat, and here I've been ever since. When I'm not at the Capitol, I am an attorney. I do intellectual property litigation for technology companies. So that's one of my big interests, is trying to bring more tech to the state, try to bring more of those high-wage jobs. A lot of the companies I represent are both in Idaho and Silicon Valley and all over the nation. And I sit on the Energy, Environment, and Technology Committee, all areas of big interest, as you can imagine, the Natural Resources Committee, and the Health and Welfare Committee. I was on the Education Committee for 3 years, but then I had to move over to Health and Welfare when we very sadly lost our Minority Leader, John Rushi, in his election last year. So getting a good flavor of what all the different committees do. This year I've been working on a number of bills and other items. I have bills in the hopper right now in criminal justice reform, one to remove mandatory sentencing minimums for drug offenses. Right now there's a pretty anomalous situation where we have really severe sentences that are just required for drug offenses that aren't required for just about any other category of criminal offense. It really doesn't make sense, and it's forcing us to lock up drug addicts when there might be other paths to rehabilitation. But at the very least, I think we want judges to have the freedom to give sentences that are just. Also working on a civil asset forfeiture reform bill, had a bill to call for climate change to be addressed in the state of Idaho, and I'm working on the governor's task force on higher education. So trying to figure out how we can get more kids graduating with diplomas of some kind, post-secondary, and get our workforce to be more competitive going forward.
What do you think is the biggest issue facing Idaho?
Well, I'm going to give a bit of an abstract answer to that, but I think the biggest issue is really whether Idaho is going to do the things it takes to have a really educated, high-paid workforce going forward, or whether we are going to continue going to the path of being the Mississippi of the West. And so really, are we going to invest in our education and build the skills in our workforce that are going to draw in high-wage jobs, or are we going to be going after those minimum wage jobs that we've been pursuing historically and that we've unfortunately proven to be dominant at so far?
What were some of the big things to come up this week in committee or on the floor?
One of the big things that happened last week and that's moving forward right now are the science standards. I hope you all heard about that. The House Education Committee struck 5 paragraphs out of our state school science standards. They struck out any teaching of climate change, any teaching of the importance of biodiversity and the impact of human beings on that. Really unfortunate. This is some really established science that they don't want our kids to be learning about. We can still fix that. It's on its way to the Senate. And if the Senate approves the rules, we can still make sure that our kids are learning good science. So I hope that people are going to be very involved in that. The other thing I think that's very big and significant is the CON-CON, which was introduced in the Senate a couple days ago. The call for an Article 5 constitutional convention that I wrote an op-ed in various papers around Idaho on. I'm sure there are more things, but those are some biggies.
Can you explain a little more about what the CON-CON is?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are 2 ways that you can amend the U.S. Constitution. There's the tried and true way, which is where Congress proposes an amendment and it gets shopped around to all the states, and if 3/4 of them approve it, then it becomes the part of the Constitution. That's how every amendment that has ever been passed has been passed into the Constitution. But there is another unknown, untried way, which is an Article 5 convention, where if 2/3 of the states call for it, Congress is required to call a new convention to consider amending our Constitution. This is, in my mind, a much more dangerous approach because nobody sees what they're voting on. It's not like a regular amendment where you can see it in black and white. You know exactly what you're voting on and whether you like it or not. Here, you are turning loose a bunch of strangers to potentially rewrite our Constitution. And most legal scholars say there's really no way to confine what they decide to do once they get in that room. And some of the things that people want to do, I think, are pretty frightening, but we really don't know what they're going to do. Some people want to write abortion bans into the Constitution. Some people want to write gay marriage bans into the Constitution. Some people, there's a whole laundry list of what could happen once they get in that room and are turned loose to rewrite our Constitution. We're dangerously close. The magic number is 34 states. When 34 states call for it, that's when you hit the 2/3 threshold. We're at 28 states right now. So the remaining 6 states take on pretty big significance, and Idaho is one of those states.
What is the most interesting thing that has happened so far this year?
Oh, interesting in a good way. Boy, I wish I could think of more happening interesting in a good way. Well, it was certainly very exciting that the governor did call for this task force on higher education. I'm going to stick with the positive. I think that's really a potentially great thing. Higher education was really sent to the back of the line in recent years when we finally started restoring education funding. They took big hits during the recession, even bigger hits than K-12 education took. But in the last few years, we have been restoring funding to K-12, but really not to higher ed. They're still well below 2009 funding levels. And we're really facing a crisis of kids being able to go on to college. We have one of the lowest go-on rates. We know to be economically competitive, we need 60% of our populace to have some sort of post-secondary degree. We're nowhere near that number right now. And rising tuition costs, failure to pay competitive wages to higher education faculty, there are a lot of factors going into that. And a really wonderful team of folks has been convened to address those problems and come up with recommendations for how we can fix higher education. And I'm on that task force, so I'm really excited about that. Now we just have to make sure they don't hatchet the budget to the point where there's no money for the task force to do anything.
Speaking of hatching the budget, can you talk a little bit about Representative Moyle's tax
bill? Oh, yes. So really, whatever issue you're concerned about, you should be concerned about this tax bill. So this is House Bill 67, which passed through the House and has gone over to the Senate, and we are really hoping the Senate will stop this bill. This bill would pull from 51 to really more likely $58 million out of our budget. It's a tax cut for the top marginal tax rate, to pull that top rate from 7.4 to 7.2%. In terms of where the dollars would go, it's pretty eye-opening. The overwhelming amount of the money is going to go to the people at the top. If you're a middle-class family, if you're a lower-income family, you're going to get between $4 a year and $32 a year. So, maybe enough to go out for a meal once, if you're lucky, unless you're in the group that's only getting $4 a year. But if you make a lot of money, if you make $400,000 or more, then you get thousands of dollars in tax cuts from this bill. But the net result is it's going to just hatchet the funds that we have available to do things like fix higher education, to do things like make sure we are raising teacher salaries as we committed to do in the career ladder legislation. Plus, we have a lot of uncertainty with health care. If the Affordable Care Act is repealed, it's going to punch a hole in our budget you could drive a truck through. We are going to lose $220 million a year potentially in federal dollars if the ACA is repealed. So it seems to me a little bit crazy to be giving away all this money from our budget when we face such complete uncertainty on so many fronts, and the certainties we face in terms of areas we really do need to restore funding, and not to mention infrastructure. We still have great needs in infrastructure repair. So yeah, if that House Bill 67 goes through, I think we can say goodbye to most of what we want to do on a lot of fronts. So I urge everybody to write into the Senate Tax Committee and ask them to hold House Bill 67. It's just too dangerous.
Speaking of health care, there was a proposal from Representative Fred Wood. Can you kind of explain what that's supposed to do?
Yeah. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with the gap problem that we have, the 78,000 or possibly more now, who have no health care insurance because they make too much money for Medicaid and too little money to be covered on the health exchange. And the state has been dropping the ball year after year after year and refusing to accept federal dollars to cover that population. Sorry about that. I hope I can. Someone keeps calling. I'll get back to them later. But yeah. So we're not doing the things we need to do. Basically, we're not giving the kind of full coverage. But Fred Wood has come up with this proposal to use a small amount of Millennium Fund dollars. Those are the dollars that we got from tobacco settlements, which thus far have been dedicated to prevention, kind of education programs on tobacco and drugs. But there's a little bit of leftover money in that. He wants to use that for the GAP population. it's really tough to know what to do with this bill because it's such a trivial amount of money. It does not come anywhere close to meeting the needs of this GAP population. I think it would provide in the neighborhood of $100 a year, maybe, for those in the GAP population. It would be allocated on a first-come, first-served basis. So whoever first gets in the door with their healthcare needs would get the money, and then it would probably be gone in a matter of weeks. So I don't think it's a very equitable distribution of the money. It's kind of trivial in terms of the needs that it would cover. Is it better than nothing? Sorry about that. Arguably, I don't know. I'm always a little bit afraid in this place that when we do this kind of thing, they're going to say, okay, we've solved the GAP population now, when, in no way, no how have we solved the GAP population problem. And I think there are those that are also concerned about pulling it out of the Millennium Fund, where it really is supposed to be addressing important things like preventing tobacco use and preventing drug use. So, haven't entirely decided where I'm going to come out on this one. I do feel very strongly that it's a totally inadequate solution to the problem facing us. Remains to be seen whether it ultimately is better than nothing or not. So, but I really urge everybody not to think that this is some kind of a solution to our Medicaid gap. It is not. And frankly, we could be facing a much bigger problem again in an ACA repeal, where we not only have the 78,000 uninsured now, but another 100+ thousand that are kicked off their insurance if that health exchange shuts down. So we could be looking at an uninsured population far, far in excess of the 78,000 we already have.
Do you think you'll still get out by March 24th?
Well, probably. I don't know. It's a little bit out of my hands, but I think they're enforcing the transmittal date. For those of you out there, that's the last date at which a bill can cross over from the House to the Senate or the Senate to the House. So that deadline is March 7th. So then that kind of cuts off the spigot, and then you just have to deal with the things that were in the pipeline as of March 7th. So, presumably a couple weeks will be enough. They can be pretty good at putting our nose to the grindstone and having us meet very long days when they really want to meet that deadline. So we could be here, 10 hours a day just voting on bills if they're really committed to getting out of here by that date. It's when my kids' spring break starts, so it wouldn't be a bad thing to be able for once to join my kids on spring break. Haven't been able to do that in a few years.
And that's it. Do you have any final words?
A few final words. Anybody out there watching, I've been really encouraged at the wave of civic engagement I've seen. I've been hearing from more people than ever before who are really scared about what's happening on every level of government and want to start stepping up and being involved. Please go with that. Please do that. We need you more than ever. We have a lot of really frightening bills coming down the pike, and the only thing that's going to stop them is an outcry from the public. And some groups have been really great at trying to activate that. I want to give a shout out to Deborah Silver and her Take 5 group, and there have been so many citizen groups out there doing this. Please send emails, please call, please come to committees. I'm just going to give you some tips on some of the ones that are worrying me, and I'll give you some email addresses to make it good and easy for you. If you want to stop that House Bill 67 that would really endanger our education funding and our funding for so much more, it's over there right now in the Senate Taxation Committee where they are debating what to do with it, and I think it would really help to hear from you and say, please don't let this bill advance. You can reach them at sloc@senate.idaho.gov. If you're worried about a rewrite of our Constitution and all the frightening things that could come out of that, you can email the Senate State Affairs Committee, who is in the middle of hearing that bill, and that's going to be coming up for a final hearing. And please come in and testify as well. There will be public testimony allowed at that. So keep an eye on when that's scheduled for a hearing. And you can email that committee at ssstaf@senate.idaho.gov. Trying to think, if you're concerned about our kids not learning about climate change and the butchering of our school science standards, they're going to be hearing that. I think it's February 24th. Want to confirm that date, but that's what I've been told. You can come testify on that as well in committee. And if you want to email that committee, they are at sedu@senate.idaho.gov. So those are just a few ideas. More than that, and actually, I'm also planning to hold a hearing, an informational hearing on climate change and its effects on Idaho and what we should be doing about it. Still getting that scheduled. Stay tuned for that. Would really like strong public turnout for that too, and support for it. So stay engaged, be more engaged than you have ever been, and thanks for tuning in.